So, hi, good morning. Thank you all for coming here. I'd like to thank Chris for his introduction and also to thank the IIC for the invitation to be here with you this morning. So I'd like to make an introduction about Brazil and then talk about our audiovisual and communications market and the challenges that we are facing right now there. This is Brazil and the world, for those of you that don't know where we are, but and this is our political division, the states and the cities, and so on. Well, Brazil is called Federative Republic of Brazil. It's our name. We are the largest country in Latin America, the 5th largest country by area in the world, and the 6th by population, and the 8th by GDP. So it's a very, very important market. And Brazil was so close to the world for many years, but it's opened itself more and more to globalization and to the world. Those are important years in our history. And Brazil is celebrating in 2022 200 years of its independence from Portugal. We also had in 1964 a military coup, which was a tragedy for us. But since 1985, Brazil is a democratic country. And in next year, we will have elections for president. We are amongst right now a political crisis, but Brazil is getting more and more stable, and next year will be a very important year for us. We have a federal district, 26 states, and about 5,600 cities. It's a very complex country. But the most important thing that you should know about Brazil is that we have in Brazil a football club called Fluminense, which is the best in the world. Of course, I am a supporter, so. But probably most of you saw those 3 covers of The Economist magazine. First one in 2000 now. Brazil takes off. We were very enthusiastic about our possibilities. We were among the boom of the commodities all over the world. And the Brazilian economy is based on commodities, unfortunately. But in 2003, the optimistic scenario suddenly became to change, and the cover was, has Brazil blown it? And yes, we did it, unfortunately. And very bad government management, I have to say. But and finally, in 2016, the betrayal of Brazil. But the good news is we had a change in government last year, and the new government inaugurated some austerity policies, very fiscal responsibility spirit. And so we are now recovering from the worst recession that we ever had in our history, 2015, 2016. And we are recovering. All the main figures of our economy now are positive. So we are in a good direction. We are in the right track right now. Well, we had a crisis, as I said, the worst recession, but we had a fantasy island, and the fantasy island was exactly the audiovisual and the communications markets, there was no recession on those areas, which is amazing. So I'll try to present the main data to you about those two areas. Well, and the foundation for that was, in terms of communications, 19 years ago, and it's amazing to realize that we're celebrating right now the 19th anniversary of the privatization of the communication sector in Brazil, because it was all state-owned, except for television. But all the telecom business was state-owned only 19 years ago. And I remember when I moved from Rio de Janeiro to São Paulo in the beginning of the 19th, in order to have a telephone in my home, a ground line, I had to pay $2,000 for it. It was amazing. But we had the privatization process 19 years ago, and now we're booming also in the telecom business. In terms of the audiovisual market, those are the foundations of what happened in Brazil. The audiovisual law in 1993, the creation of the National Film Agency in 2001, the creation of Condecine, and I have to explain to you what is Condecine. Condecine is a contribution, a tax that applies to many transactions made in the audiovisual business and also on the telecom business as well. And that money goes to a fund called the Audiovisual Fund, and it funds the local audiovisual industry, which is a nice, interesting combination. So we had the Audiovisual Fund created in 2007, and also in 2011, our pay TV law, which is, I think, it's a good example of ex post regulation, which is our policy, our approach to regulation in Brazil. So let's see some facts and figures about our audiovisual industry. So the Brazilian audiovisual industry was responsible for adding through the years those figures to the Brazilian GDP. So we're talking about here we're talking about added value to the economy, $9.2 billion on 2014. Also, the annual growth compound, as you can see, it's far ahead of the annual growth compound of the whole economy. And that's why I call it a fantasy island, because we were growing when Brazil was, the whole economy was coming downwards and backwards, sorry. And in terms of all the economic sectors, let's see how the Brazilian audiovisual industries position itself. So the telecom business responds for $26 billion in terms of added value to our GDP. And so we are ahead of the paper industry, the pharmaceutics industry, the computer and electronic industry, textile industry, and other more traditional industrial sectors. The interesting thing is that most people don't realize that. Most people still consider the audiovisual industry somehow not important in terms of economics. But it's not true, as you can see here. So in terms of percentage, it means 0.43% of the Brazilian GDP, which is very important. It's one of the 10 most important economic activities in our country, and also in terms of the generation of jobs as well, as you can see. We are booming in every aspect of the audiovisual industry for the past 10 years. We're talking about 10 years with economic growth in a row, and in every aspect of the industry. So you can see number of cinema screens in Brazil is growing. Brazilian cinema admissions, so box office, we're growing as well. This year we'll probably go surpass the 200 million tickets parameter, and the number of Brazilian films released in our market as well, 129 in 2015, 143 in 2016, some around 150 or 160 this year. In terms of pay TV, with the pay TV law that regulated the pay TV sector in 2011, we established a quota for Brazilian content and also for Brazilian channels. The obligation will be to display 2.08%, so it's a very small quota, but it had a significant impact on the market and on the development of the local content industry. So in total programming. So in 2016, the answer, the response from the market was very, very interesting, because now the quotas are surpassed, and we don't have to do any more measures in order to ask the channels to fulfill the quota. So displayed in 2016, the market displayed all the channels combined 217% more than the obligation. And out of 6.6% of the Brazilian content displayed, 4% were independent production. So about 2/3 of what has been shown was independent production. In terms of prime time, the quota was 8.3% at prime time, and the channels actually displayed 13.6%, which is a very, very good response from them. We appreciate it a lot. And so another thing about the Brazilian market and how the society in Brazil deals with the consumption of audiovisual content is that Brazilians, we spend a lot of time on the internet, mainly through mobile devices. I was this morning reading a study that was released yesterday, showing that in 2020, probably around 50% of all audiovisual content will be consumed through mobile devices, and we already are doing this in Brazil right now. Around 50% of all audiovisual content consumed by people is shown through mobile devices. And another interesting data is that we have a huge deficit in terms of foreign trade regarding the audiovisual industry. Here you have our data about sales, acquisition, the result, and the coverage index. So the deficit is huge. So we face the challenge of making our content more international, more globalized. We have to sell more around the world. And I think we have interesting content to sell as well. So let's take a look, a deep look on the pay TV market in Brazil. Here's the added value to our economy by the pay TV market only, $4.7 billion. So we're talking about half of the whole contribution of the audiovisual market to the Brazilian GDP. We had, starting in 2007, a huge growth in terms of pay TV subscribers, as you can see here. And the highest point was reached in 2014, and 2015 and 2016, we had a kind of a tectonic alignment, and so the market is adjusting itself. But I was talking with many players for this the sector a couple weeks ago, and they told me that they're not facing until by now the impact of VOD on the pay TV market. There is no impact. They credited this adjustment in terms of subscribers to the economic crisis and not to the impact of the VOD. Around 2/3 of the people who access content through VOD and OTT in Brazil also are pay TV subscribers. It's interesting if you take a look at the pay TV market, that Brazil is the fourth country in the world with higher revenues on this area, $7.3 billion in 2015, and it's an interesting data as well. So let's take a look on the VOD market in Brazil. First, how many people have TIC devices there? Because it helps us to figure out the potential of the market right now. So 97% of the Brazilian population have broadcast TV on their homes. 93% have mobile phones, and around 100 million cell phones are smartphones, which is configures a huge market for the consumption of audiovisual content there. So 19% had video game console. 29% of all households have access to pay TV, 25% desktop, 32% laptop, 19% tablet, and 17% have access to VOD and OTT services. So video on demand, proportion of households with internet access. So we have almost 51% of all the populations with internet access, so they can consume audiovisual content through VOD and OTT services. This is by class, and this is a very interesting research, a recent one, that shows us what Brazilians do on the internet. And as you can see, besides sending instant messages, we are a huge, strong users of services like WhatsApp, Skype, and Facebook in Brazil. But 66% of the population uses internet to share content, images and videos on the internet, and 64% to watch videos, TV shows, or movies in online through services such as YouTube and Netflix. We are heavy users of YouTube in Brazil. We have YouTube channels there with more than 70 million subscribers. And it became a huge source of revenue for many people in many companies in Brazil as well as in the world. Well, before I end my presentation, I'd like to talk to you about the legal and regulatory environment that we have right now in Brazil. The Minister for Culture is responsible for Ancine, which is the National Film Agency, and Ancine have a role on the regulation of the film business, the production of audiovisual content in general, and also on the regulation of VOD and pay TV. And there is a complementary agency called Anatel, who is in charge of the regulation of the communications business, telecoms, free TV, and also Ancine and Anatel have a shared role on the regulation of pay TV. So, first, the principles. The legal and regulatory environment in Brazil regarding the audiovisual industry is guided, among others, by the constitutional rights of freedom of expression, speech, and information, freedom of enterprise and competition, promotion and protection of the Brazilian culture. So we tend to have a light approach on regulation, and the main idea is to stimulate and to promote the development of the market, respecting, of course, the rights of the consumers. Also, as I said, freedom of enterprise and competition, and also promotion and protection of Brazilian content. So the idea is also to help the development of our own audiovisual industry. So we have different laws and segments, and in terms of the regulatory environment, and its enforcement is made, as I told you, by different government agencies. Free-to-air TV regulation has a specific chapter in the Constitution and is enforced by the Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation, and Communications. Anatel, the other agency that I mentioned to you, is linked with this ministry. Cinema is regulated by a specific legislation, and its implementation is carried out by the Brazilian film industry, a Brazilian film agency, Brazilian Film Authority, which is Ancine. And pay TV is also regulated by specific legislation, and its regulatory enforcement is shared between Brazilian Telecommunications Authority, Anatel, as I told you, and the Brazilian Film Authority, Ancine. So Anatel deals with the distribution of pay TV, and Ancine deals with packaging and programming. The regulation of video on demand is also a subject in Brazil, as it is here and everywhere else. And we are currently debating it and waiting for the European, as I have to say that, waiting for you to see how you are dealing with it here. In 2015, the Superior Council of Cinema, comprised of representatives of the industry and the government, and chaired by the Minister of Culture, initiated debates about the regulation of VOD. Uncini was responsible to elaborate a proposal of possible directives for a regulatory framework. We did many seminars and conferences about it. We invited many representatives from other countries also to come to share their experiences. But the main idea is that we will only do things after an intensive and transparent public consultation with all stakeholders of the market. The idea is, as usual, to put everybody on the table and try to find a common ground. The current proposal, 2017, under discussion include financing for promotion of Brazilian content, innovative business models and technologies, revision of taxes. This is a main and important issue, because there is uncertainty about how Condecine will apply to the VOD and the OTT services, and it is keeping many services to start operating in Brazil, which is bad for the whole market and bad for our industry as well. So we are now devoting ourselves to solve this insecurity, to solve this problem. There is a task force approaching this issue. Our approach, as I told you, is ex post regulation, compensatory measures, and a possible harmonization of the regulatory balance between pay TV and the VOD segments. The biggest challenges that we're facing right now: remove barriers to investment, simplification of procedures, reduction of government burden, better regulation based in simple rules, and a rational tax system. Pro-competitive regulation based in ex-post evaluation and measures, massive investments in broadband infrastructure to remove bottlenecks, we're doing it right now, and effective measures to promotion and protection of intellectual property rights in a convergent environment. Also, the promotion of the diversity and pluralism in this new environment. So those are the main challenges that we are facing right now. And I have to say to you, last but not least, that as Tom Jobim, the famous Brazilian composer, once said, Brazil is not for beginners. It's a very complex country, and sometimes it's hard to understand what's happening there. But what I'd like to tell you is that we have a very prudent and a calm approach to regulation, and that we are pro-market and pro-business there. And we are overcoming the economic crisis, and we have very good numbers right now. So thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.